Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof, sort of, for the 26th of August 2024. I've just mowed the lawn and sucked out the rainwater that have fallen into our 12-foot best way oversized paddling pool, and we're packing that away for the year. I now physically cannot stand. I've really struggled to even walk to my study. I'm done. My MS has got the better of me. What I can still do is talk. So lucky you guys, you're going to be subjected to me rambling on about Ukraine again. Sorry, not sorry. Let's start with our military aid segment. We're going to do military aid and geopolitics again together in a video. Washington Post has stated that the Biden administration is still debating whether to help Kiev's forces hold and perhaps even expand the sliver of territory they now occupy in Russia's Kursk region. So, although Colby Badwell goes off to say, how is this even a question? Does Biden want Ukraine to slowly lose this war of attrition, or a war of attrition? What's interesting here is, like, the only way that they can help is through military aid here. You're not going to help by going, do you want us to rub your back? Do you want us to hold your hair while you're doing that? No, so help means military aid, perhaps military intelligence. And that's interesting. So, giving them extra stuff in order to specifically achieve those goals. They're still trying to, I think, work out what they think about Kursk. And we'll come to that later, because there is this idea that you kind of Israel have done this, whereas you attack without permission from the US, and then the US have to kind of post hoc after the fact say, oh yeah, that was okay, right? And you're forcing the US's hand, and that's something that the Ukrainians have decided to do here, because they know that had they asked beforehand, Russia would have said no. US would have said no, you can't do that. But anyway, it'd be interesting if the US do suddenly say, okay, here are some things that will help you particularly, or lifting restrictions, of course, is the biggest thing, and we're going to return to that subject soon. Now, talking about US aid, it's worth. I mentioned this conversation earlier in my previous video. So Ukraine Battle Map said, if Ukraine were given a sufficient number of Bradley Strikers, F-16s, Patriots, Nazans, Vampires, ATACMS, JASMs, the war would have been going entirely differently. USA's unwillingness to send Ukraine the aid it needs is the main reason Ukraine can't defend itself well enough. And Simplicius here, who's evidently a troll, and I've been and looked, and yeah, this is a pro-Russian dude. If Ukraine was given any more of a sufficient number of any of these, then NATO would be literally left defenseless. It's called zero-sum game, he says, rather patronizingly. And of course, that's complete nonsense. There are indeed F-16s sitting, gathering dust, not doing anything. There are Bradleys by the thousands sitting in a desert in the US that are not apportioned to any unit. They are literally they are scrapping Bradleys. I mean, this statement from Simplicius couldn't be further from the truth. And as Ukraine Battle Map says back, the US sent Ukraine 2 of its 50 Patriots, 190 of its 4,300 Strikers, 300 of its 5,500 M2 or M3 Bradleys. So that's 5,500 Bradleys, and it sent 300. Some people saying that have actually sent more, just not declared. Anyway, 31 of its 2 to 4,000 Abrams, 31 of its 2 to 4,000 tanks, 200 of its 14,000 long-range missiles, 0 of its 3,000 fighter jets, 200 of its 2,200 howitzers. Do some research before posting false information. I mean, absolutely brilliant from Ukraine Battle Map there to put this person in his place. Although, of course, water off a duck's back. But arguing with Russians or pro-Russians on Tinternet is a thankless task, isn't it? But it is worth knowing that, and this is why I speak and we speak so often about the US. It's not that it's up to the US to do X, Y, and Z, and they're the world's policemen and, always going cap in hand to the US. It's that the US has spent stupendous amounts of money, more than the next 12 nations combined on a yearly basis. So when you're worrying about China and Russia and the UK and Saudi Arabia and India and whatever other nation you want to worry about, the US spends more than all of those combined on defense every single year. And so they have the greatest resources in order to dip into to help Ukraine. That would not affect the US. They're moving beyond those Abrams tanks now to a newer variant. They are moving beyond those Bradleys to, there is just so much scope for the US to help, and it would not be a dent to them financially, as in the cost of sending them would be the cost of transportation and possibly the cost of refurbishing them, these things, so that they are fighting ready. But essentially, these have already been bought and paid for, like I've said a million times. Now, German Aid to Ukraine talked the other day about Germany training Patriot crews, and he was suggesting that it would make very little sense if you just training them for shits and giggles, that they must be trained because there are some Patriot systems due to go to Ukraine. But he was saying it can't be the German ones because they've gone, so it's probably going to be Romanian one, or maybe the Dutch combined effort that they're giving to Ukraine. Upon my inquiry, a spokesperson says German Aid to Ukraine for the Luftwaffe told me that training of Ukrainian soldiers on Patriot air defense systems is not linked to the delivery of equipment. The trained personnel could also be deployed on a rotating basis as alternating crews or in shifts. So I cannot confirm that Germany, with the fourth training of Ukrainian soldiers on MIM 104 Patriot, is taking over the training part for another country, which has currently promised a fire unit to Ukraine. So, for example, Romania or the Netherlands. So if the training really has nothing to do with the transfer of equipment from other countries, it would be the first time that the Luftwaffe is training pure replacement or spare crews. And of course, you are going to get natural wastage of crews. Somebody might have a heart attack, somebody might actually get to retirement age who's on those crews, or they are needed somewhere else on some other system or whatever it is. You are going to need to keep generating well-trained Patriot crews, and I wonder whether people will be learning on the job as well, whether Ukraine will be providing their own training for those systems alongside. Necessary tea break. Again, sorry, not sorry. Right, German Aid to Ukraine then adds, we recently saw footage of a German-delivered Marder 1A3 with some good upgrades. Here we have another example of such an IFV in Ukrainian service. This one was upgraded with plenty of grille protection, as well as a drone cage and chain protection. As of today, at least 120 Marder 1A3 infantry fighting vehicles have been delivered to Ukraine by Germany, partly in cooperation with Denmark, with another 20 to be delivered in the future. The original source is a small TikTok channel, so I decided not to show the source of the footage and also blur out the face of the Ukrainian soldier before uploading the footage. So you can see that even when they do get, the Marders are ostensibly a little bit like the Bradleys. These are older bits of kit, but they are still substantially better than the Soviet era equipment that Ukraine are predominantly using or have been predominantly using. And they get upgraded before they go, quite possibly. And also, when they go there, you can see they get further upgraded with cope cages and chains to protect them from the rigors of war in a drone-infested landscape. Okay, I didn't show you this actually the other day, and I probably should have done so. In talking about the Palencia, the homegrown jet-propelled drone that Zelensky talked about the other day, that had an unknown range, an unknown warhead, but it kept quiet for OPSEC reasons. I should have showed you this video because it shows you how easy this thing is to put together. So it's delivered in a box, as you can see, and you just take out the missile. Look, the missile doesn't even look. Sorry, my fingers, I can't feel them, so they do funny things. It doesn't take an awful lot to fix this thing. It's like the simplest of Airfix models, and it looks to be relatively light as well. You then, after fixing the wings to it, you just send it off, and it kind of leaves its carriage behind, and bish bash bosh, there you go. That's fairly easy and apparently fairly cheap compared to analogous systems that are otherwise used. So that is the Palencia. Let's move on. Here we have, now I didn't know where to include this. This is, I guess, money going to Russia's military war, their war project. So it could be in the geopolitics section. The Daily Telegraph reports that Russia has seized more than $100 million from Google for propaganda of war in Ukraine. In 2022, bailiffs seized funds from Google's Russian accounts, bankrupting the company's Russian division. So we know there's a big fight. They've stopped YouTube recently in Russia, and Google, I think, have hit back by demonetizing all sorts of Russian entities that act through Google and YouTube, etc., etc. My guess is that's probably going to hurt Russia more than they gain from keeping a tighter information net, certainly financially. Anyway, the seized money was transferred to Russian TV channels such as RT and Tsargrad to support the Kremlin's war. Tsargrad is the one connected to someone connected to right-wing politics in the US as well. That TV channel, I forget his name, but they brought over the former Fox News producer, I think, to work with Tsargrad. Anyway, yeah, so that is interesting that there's been a bit of a fight behind the scenes between Google and Russia. Okay, I showed you this video of a cruise missile hitting the water from this morning, and I said, yeah, it's great. You know, one would far prefer a missile to miss or get affected by electronic warfare and hit the water like that than hit critical infrastructure. Michael McKay says Russian terrorists conducted a precision strike on the Dnipro River with a $10 million cruise missile. It's not known how many Ukrainian fish died in the insidious attack. Of course, the sad thing is that wherever missiles land, there will be damage to the ecosystem here. So that is genuinely a shame. But yeah, you would rather that than slamming into an apartment block. We have seen the missile attack on and drone attack on Ukraine. We've seen details emerge as the day has gone on. My first reaction to look at this map was, oh my goodness, I think the Russians are really aiming for the industrial military complex that no doubt exists over towards the west of Ukraine, where it's safe to build factories, to build, you know, whether it be the Fuchs APC or the Lynx IFV or whatever missile, that jet propelled drone that we just looked at, whatever it is. I think that this map implies, or my inference would be, that the indigenous manufacturing has been hit. However, subsequent claims are, this is Ukraine frontline, and I can't speak to the truth of this, but there is destruction all over the country. Everything that flew exclusively at critical infrastructure and energy. They did not touch military facilities this time. So I find that quite interesting. And on the one hand, it surprises me. On the other hand, it doesn't surprise me, actually. Because you think, right, they really need to be striking at military targets. They need to be better at harming Ukraine's ability to conduct the war. But on the other hand, they are trying to do what Ukraine is doing to them, which is hitting their hydrocarbons logistics to stop them being able to make money and function economically. And that is clearly hurting Russia. And Russia are going to say, right, you know, the success we had last time in striking at Ukrainian energy infrastructure, well, we're going to double that again by striking at energy infrastructure particularly. It's going to be interesting to see how much damage has been done. We have seen some strikes on hydroelectric infrastructure, and there have been power cuts, and indeed, as we'll look at in a second, Moldova has had power cuts due to, I believe, Ukraine beginning to export energy again. So they got back on their feet, and now they've been taken to their knees again by those strikes by Russia. Now, the EU ambassador to Ukraine calls for more air defences. So Katerina Matharonova called for enhanced air defence capabilities for Ukraine following the large-scale Russian attack last night that targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure. And Spartan News here saying Zelensky is sending a clear message to allies to supply what they promised to neighbours to help shoot down the missiles and drones they are capable of, and to the US to stop restricting the use of US weapons. Quote from Zelensky: weakness and inadequate responses fuel terror. That's a very pithy but very accurate, concise analysis of the situation. Now, concerning the strikes from last night, Poland saw and reported an airborne object entered from Ukraine during a massive missile attack that was not shot down due to atmospheric conditions. Polish operational commander Maciej Kilch stated that he was prepared to order its destruction and was in contact with Defense Minister Władysław Kozyniak-Kamysz and Chief of Staff Wiesław Kukula. The object disappeared approximately 25 kilometers into Polish territory, and poor atmospheric conditions prevented him from issuing the order to engage it. So very close. It looks like they were prepared to engage it, which is a step up. That's good, but it disappeared. And I have no other information about its whereabouts and whether it did a UE and went into Ukraine to hit something in Ukraine. Okay, so moving on, but still concerning the strikes from last night. Power outages in Moldova occurred after a massive Russian attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Moldova's energy operator Moldelectrica reported power outages following a Russian attack, highlighting regional energy vulnerabilities. Okay, now moving on to our friend Pavel Durov, the CEO and founder of Telegram, the social media platform. He is a Russian national who also has French citizenship. He was arrested at Le Bourget airport, returning to France from Baku from Azerbaijan, where he potentially met with Putin. Some people denying that he met, but it's rather coincidental. Lots of people claiming that this is very useful for the French to have done this, that Telegram is basically the informal comms network for the Russian military. It is that important. And we know it's that important because Russians they are spitting the dummy about this. They're having kittens over him being arrested. So just from by looking at the Russian reaction that this is much bigger than some random tech bro being sequestered. Anyway, this is how it's being reported in the Russian media. This is Steve Rosenberg doing one of his really useful BBC synopses.
One face, and not Vladimir Putin's, that dominates this morning's Russian newspapers. Pavel Durov, the billionaire Russian-born founder of the Telegram messaging app, reportedly detained on arrival in Paris on Saturday evening. Now, there is a lot we still don't know about this. But Nezavisime Gazeta's headline, "The blow to Telegram threatens to become a blow to Russia." With Pavel Durov's arrest, Western intelligence services could obtain the messenger's encryption keys. The arrest or detention in France of the 39-year-old Russian Zuckerberg, Pavel Durov, is one of the most important and most mysterious international events. Among other things,
so they've admitted that it is a really important event. One of the most important events. So this is potentially very big, even though some people have said there are some questions. It's like, what can they really do? Can they really actually shut down Telegram? Can they garner any information? I'm not sure, but the Russian reaction tells you quite a lot.
How important Telegram and its owner, the keeper of the encryption keys, are in so many areas. Despite pressure, he has not handed the keys to anyone. At least that is what Durov claims. Whatever the reason for his arrest, there's big politics involved. Komsomolskaya Pravda claims that the real aim of Macron and co. is to get hold of all the keys to confidential information, especially about Russia, which they will willingly share with the Americans. The paper notes that over the last 2.5 years of the special military operation, Russia's war in Ukraine, Durov transformed from successful IT manager and programmer into owner of an extremely important channel of closed army communications. In other words, Telegram is used a lot by the Russian military on the battlefield.
So there are two potentials here. One is that Russia is genuinely upset about the arrest because it might have huge consequences for the Russian military project, or they are trying to promote a grievance narrative, or maybe both, a grievance narrative to their own public to say, look at the world ganging up on us, screw them, you guys stick with us, we'll look after you type thing.
The paper says Russia needs to quickly create our own messenger. We should have done that long ago. Moskovsky Komsomolets, it's clear our enemies dream of getting access to chats, to the massive information in Telegram, or just blocking the platform for Russian users. And that means the Russian army too. Let's imagine Telegram crashes. How will we fight? Will we use the messenger Tam Tam, or dig up the dead granny ICQ? We could, of course, try to use the reconnaissance control and communication system Strelets, praised so highly 5 years ago. 7 years ago, our military chiefs reported it had been tested in Syria. As great a system as, well, as an Armata tank, for example.
Ooh.
Same paper, different article. Telegram might become a tool of NATO if Pavel Durov is forced to obey the French intelligence services. Izvestia, the battle with Telegram can be seen as a battle against the influence of Russia. The government paper, Rossiyskaya Gazeta, we're witnessing the decline of global digital platforms of the early 2000s and 2010s. Back then, they could ignore the will of local authorities and push their own narratives around the world, but their influence and corresponding risks became too great. Quoting various sources, Kommersant suggests Pavel Durov's detention is the result of a refusal to cooperate with the French authorities in the battle against terrorism, paedophilia, and the spread of drugs via Telegram. But in a statement, Telegram noted it is absurd to claim that a platform or its owner are responsible for abuse of that platform.
And there is a massive discussion. We've had this going on in the UK with people being held accountable for what they've said on social media. And then you've had like real right wingers when I've been making claims about stuff to do with American politics. You've got, yeah, but at least we don't live in a country where you can just get arrested for saying something on blah, 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 blah. And of course, you know, it's far more complicated than that. And it goes towards, there was a really interesting discussion on GB News the other night, when GB News is your trying to be the new Fox News in the UK. That's where it sits politically, or maybe more like OAN or Newsmax. And they had on a Daily Telegraph journalist, and it was interesting because he took a really moderate stance, and he was saying, well, actually, and the GB News person was trying to go for the whole freedom of speech, blah blah blah, and he was absolutely, you know, slam dunked by the Daily Telegraph reporter on a number of occasions, saying, well, look, you know, because the guy was trying to say, look, this is like shouting in town square and being arrested. It's like, yeah, but the town square is not owned by a multi-millionaire oligarch who has control over what is said on that platform, etc., and how it's said and who gets amplification. In talking about Twitter there, and yeah, it's a real problem that at the core of the issue is whether these social media platforms are publishers or not. So, for example, if the Daily Telegraph, and this is an example used, if the Daily Telegraph published a letter that was sent into them, and that was, say, really racist or had really horrific hate language or whatever, then the Daily Telegraph would be done. They are regulated for that. They fall under the regulations of being a publisher. But social media platforms have got around this by saying they are not publishers, and the whole legal argument is dependent on whether social media platforms are publishers or not. They say we're not publishers. These people are like self-publishing. They're all voices, blah blah blah. So therefore, we have no accountability. There is no accountability for what they say. They can say what they like, and of course, the idea is, well, what if they say hate crimes and they get singled out for that individually, and the platform is not held accountable? And so if someone does produce hate crimes that causes you know, or helps to facilitate riots, for example, through disinformation and inciting hatred, then they are picked out individually. And then other people go, oh, freedom of speech is not. Yeah, you don't have full freedom of speech to say anything you like. We've been through this 100 times, right? So we all moderate ourselves. We self-moderate, but in the case that we're unable to self-moderate, you have things like watershed in TV. So at 9 o'clock, before 9 o'clock, you can't swear or show pornography or do this, right? That is censorship, or that is moderation. And you can't say what you like here, and you can't say what you like in the middle of a lesson at school, or you get sent out of the classroom. That is moderation. That is regulation. And you get detention, and you get sent home from school if you shout racist abuse and swear at your teacher in the middle of a maths lesson. Right? This is what we do. We censor and regulate and moderate all the time. But the idea for like someone who says they're free speech absolutist is like, yeah, but on Twitter there's none of that. You can literally say what you like, but the problem is you can't say what you like, because if you say something that Elon Musk doesn't like, then you get de-amplified or censored by Elon Musk, and then he shuts down things that he doesn't like. And so therefore it's like, you're not a free speech absolutist. You're a free speech absolutist for people saying horrible things that you like, but people that say things that you don't like, you shut down. So anyway, you get the point.
Right now, it's unclear how this will play out, but expect the Russian state media to use this story to strengthen the official state narrative that all Russian citizens are treated badly now by the West.
That was my point earlier, that grievance narrative. So I'm glad he said that.
It's already there today in Komsomolskaya Pravda. For the West, there is no such thing as good Russians anymore. It will also be interesting to see to what extent coverage of this story in Russia is used to divert attention away from the dramatic events in Russia's Kursk region, where Ukrainian forces have been seizing territory.
Interesting stuff from BBC Steve Rosenberg. They're still doing a wonderful job. I'm amazed he's actually still there in Moscow. Right, Michael Weiss says, I'm yet to see any bad news out of this story. Quote, as soon as Durov hands over the keys to Telegram, and it's only a matter of time, and in the absence of effective communications tools, our army will become even more vulnerable, says Alekina. So he's a Russian mill blogger saying, writing with that apprehension himself. It's quoted from Le Monde, saying that actually this is really bad for the Russian army. So good stuff for the Ukrainians, right? Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, has now come out today and said, I have seen false information regarding France following the arrest of Pavel Durov. France is deeply committed to freedom of expression and communication, to innovation and a spirit of entrepreneurship. It will remain so. In a state governed by the rule of law, freedoms are upheld within a legal framework, both on social media and in real life, to protect citizens and respect their fundamental rights. It is up to the judiciary in full independence to enforce the law. So this is, I don't want to get too philosophical here, but the problem is rights don't exist, right? Human rights do not exist objectively. What they do is exist subjectively when we construct them, and when we agree on them, we write sort of a Bill of Rights, right? As in the US or the Constitution, you just get together with a bunch of people, you write that, and that's only meaningful. It only has purchase if you enshrine that in law, and then you have both a legal and political system that maintains that or amends that with the Constitution. You write amendments to it because it wasn't very good to begin with, or wasn't good enough to begin with, so you keep amending it, but it's just a piece of paper and it's just an agreement between people, again only meaningful when it's enshrined in law and then enacted by the judiciary, jurisprudence. So you have like a legal system where that is reflected in law, and then you have law enforcement officers who go around and enforce that law. Right, that's where it becomes meaningful. Otherwise, it's just a consensus of agreements of what we have in our heads. And so when it comes to rights, so the right to say what you like, there are other rights that come into contact with those rights. And absent of any objective framework and hierarchy, we have to argue, and that's why we have courts of law that argue, well, does that right impinge that right, and which right is more important, your right to say what you like, or your right not to be offended by having racial hatred and violence incited upon you by this person who has a freedom to say that. So then we say, well, actually, you've got a right not to be attacked for your race or religion, ethnicity, whatever. And so that right here trumps the right to free speech. But we have to argue, and not everyone's going to agree on that because there isn't an objective framework. We can't like go, oh, I've just reached this out of the ether, and it turns out that John is right and Harry is wrong. Right? We have to argue this, and that's why we have courts of law. But it is subjective. We just have lots of subjective minds, and we often disagree, and that's why we try and agree, and on consensus then write these things into law. Okay, that's kind of a bit of the philosophy behind it. But you've got to understand that this is what actually Emmanuel Macron is talking about here. He said, in a state governed by the rule of law, which we've kind of agreed on, but not everyone agrees on the rule of law. But if you don't agree on it, vote in someone who's going to change that law. That's how you do these things democratically or legally. And then through like enlightenment at universities and education, we kind of like realized that law about slavery was wrong, and now we need to overturn that and change to say slavery is now wrong, where we used to think it was right. Anyway, in a state governed by the rule of law, freedoms are upheld within a legal framework, both on social media and in real life, to protect citizens and respect their fundamental rights. It's up to the judiciary in full independence to enforce the law. So you understand, hopefully now, where I'm coming from. This is, well said by Macron. The arrest of the president of Telegram on French soil took place as part of an ongoing judicial investigation. So we've got rule of law. These are the laws. He's broken the law. You can bang on about freedom of speech, and you can have Elon Musk go, like, liberty, this is, whatever, Elon, shut up, right? He's broken the law. He has not cooperated with the French investigation, so he's been arrested. If he's done nothing wrong, rely on the law, and he should be exonerated, okay? And he may have done nothing wrong, but let's let the law sort that out, and that's kind of what Macron is saying. Anyway, as part of an ongoing judicial investigation, it is in no way a political decision. It is up to the judges to rule on the matter. But I wonder, I don't know how much of this, if anything, is to do with the war in Ukraine. Like this, it does do the DGSC or is it DGSC, the French intelligence services, do they have any input in this decision, in this event? Or was this purely like part of an ongoing thing between the media regulators and whatever, and general judiciary to do with arms trafficking and people trafficking and drugs trafficking that's taking place through Telegram? And Telegram is this willing, complicit variable in those law infractions. And in which case, Pavel Durov, you haven't helped us previously. We've asked you to help us. You've refused. Now the law is going to come down heavy on you. So we shall see. Okay, Moldovan runaway oligarchs, and this isn't necessarily to do with Ukraine or Russia particularly, although I think it is tangentially linked very much to Russia. But this is to remind us of how disinformation works. So Moldovan runaway oligarchs Ilan Shor in Russia and Vyacheslav Platon in the UK have spent €136,000 in the past 90 days on Facebook-sponsored content discrediting Moldova's EU integration and promoting Russian narratives, says an analysis from the think tank Watchdog. So very interesting there. Knowledge is power, so it's great that we know about this, and we can see as well the importance of social media platforms, in this case Facebook, but we've talked about Telegram, not so much in terms of disinformation, but in raw communication between the Russian entities. I mean, Telegram probably does have vast issues with disinformation and facilitating the spread of disinformation. But, Facebook is one of the main ones. We've got TikTok and we've got, of course, Twitter. Now, the recent EU report pointed that all three of those ones are hugely involved in facilitating the spread of disinformation, but that Twitter is the worst. And that's why Elon Musk is panicking, because if France and by extension the EU start acting on Telegram, then he is getting rather nervous about what will happen with the EU acting on Twitter. And there are things afoot. Twitter's already he's being investigated by the SEC in the US for the way that he bought Twitter and what happened thereafter. So there are issues for Elon Musk, and he has every not every right to be worried. He has every good reason to be worried, and so he should be. Modi visited Kiev recently, of course. Euromaidan Press sort of sums up that was it a peace broker or an arms shopper? India's Prime Minister talks peace 6 weeks after hugging Putin. Experts eye India's military ambitions as a motive. Behind closed doors, 3-hour talks with Zelensky and a public message of, quote, no solution on the battlefield. Bloomberg reports that Modi agreed to relay messages between Putin and Zelensky, but no formal mediator role, so a bit behind the scenes. Economic interests also loom large. India aims to reduce 86% reliance on Russian arms. We talked about this previously. You can't rely on Russia for arms because they are, at the moment, not able to fulfill international arms contracts because they need everything themselves, pretty much. There are a few things that are getting out, but essentially Russia is in a lot of trouble. It's also sanctioned, so it can't make particularly good weaponry. at the moment, when you look at the tanks that are coming to the front line, they are with 2024 or 2022 upgrades that are actually downgrades in compared to what they would otherwise be able to provide. Some of those optics and components that they're using are just not good enough. And if you are a nation looking to shop around the world to see what the best equipment you can get or best bang for your buck, is not going to come from Russia. So they are struggling as an arms provider. And also that will entail their maintenance schedules after you buy equipment from them. Now, India has traditionally, it's got 86% reliance on Russian arms. We've seen that change over time. They're starting to build more of their own stuff just for their own economic benefit, as well as, I guess, security, international security, if you like, defense security. It's better to do it yourself than rely on others, because if you go to war with them or have a disagreement with them, then they stop maintaining your defense equipment. Okay, so, but also there are other nations like China and other, the US, for example, are showing, this war is showing that US arms products are better than the Russians. They're a better buy. Yeah, you have to spend more money, but you get a better result from using them. So India might have been going to Ukraine to kind of sound out possibly buying stuff from Ukraine going forward after the war ends, or I don't know. India aims to reduce 86% reliance on Russian arms, eyes Ukraine's military tech, yet no arms deals have been signed. Of course, Ukraine aren't in a position to export themselves, but it's going to be a long-term, with a long-term view in mind. Instead, agreements on culture, agriculture, and medicine were agreed. Modi's tightrope walk continues. So he's obviously a member of BRICS, Russia, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So India have to kind of sort of toe the party line in terms of BRICS objectives, but also they aren't a massive fan of Russia, I don't think. It's a marriage of convenience, rather like it is with China and Russia, and indeed China and India. So you've got these uncomfortable relationships that these nations are having, predominantly because they want to create an alternative to the dollar and to the US hegemony, but they've kind of got into bed with a bunch of people they don't really like. Anyway, free trade zones in general are a major black hole, says Eric Woods here. As long as Russian actors have access to deliberately opaque third-party jurisdictions, this will continue to happen. This is another Robin Brooks chart that we see so often, these turquoise blue spiking graphs that show usually a spike in exports to random countries from, say, EU countries or the US to Kyrgyzstan, or spiking since 2022. Here we have, weirdly, because Armenia is right next to Russia, really, you'd think, surely equipment will go from Armenia, or components, whatever it is, washing machines, will go from Armenia straight to Russia. Well, here the UAE have morphed, says Robin Brooks, into a massive transshipment hump for Western goods going to Russia. Here's Armenian exports to the UAE, which used to be essentially zero, and are now running at $800 million per month. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that this stuff goes to Russia. So the UAE is really talking out both sides of their mouth. Yes, they're involved in prisoner exchanges. They were involved in, say, Sean Pinner and Roman Abramovich facilitating that prisoner swap for Medvedchuk, and all those prisoners they end up going to the UAE, I think it was, and then on to their home countries. Well, Armenia appears to be shipping an awful lot of goods to the UAE, and then one can imagine that those goods are going to Russia. Okay, here we have the footage of, for example, the dam in Kiev getting hit, so the massive attack that took place last night, and we're still getting information filtering through about that. Just wanted to get the read on that. There are certain people, someone like Anne Applebaum is already a big supporter of Ukraine, the American, married to the Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister. She says, time to let Ukrainians hit what they need to hit, wherever it is located. Yet another massive attack on civilian infrastructure is further proof that Russia has no interest in ending the war or negotiating peace. And I agree with that. Now, sticking on America, having gone to America now, a recent poll by YouGov reveals that Americans have become more likely, to view Ukraine as winning its war with Russia following Ukraine's recent operation in Kursk Oblast. 22% of US adult citizens believe that Ukraine is winning, compared to 16% who say that Russia is winning. 34% say neither side, and 28% are unsure. And you can see the split in the demographics there. And obviously, big differences in Democrats and Republicans and indeed independents. So that is interesting stuff, and it shows that the incursion into Kursk has achieved a number of objectives. Whether that was originally part of what they were planning on achieving, I don't know. But it's not only about morale boost for Ukrainians, where Ukrainians then feel good about the war and start feeling more upbeat, and then that leads to demanding higher thresholds for negotiating with Russia because they think we're in a good position, and or no, we're not going to go to negotiate with Russia. We need to keep pushing on. We can do this. We can do this. Actually, you've got Americans thinking along those lines as well, and I think that's really important for generating or continuing to generate support for Ukraine politically and militarily from, in this case, the US. Now, Jakub Janowski from Oryx points out that this is a good article from the Financial Times. And in my opinion, this quote is very accurate. So the quote is, with the Kursk offensive, so we're sticking on that, the Ukrainians have taken a leaf out of Israel's book by taking military action that has not been approved in Washington. The assumption by both Ukraine and Israel is that if the action is successful, it will receive retrospective approval by America. If it fails, the US will ultimately help them deal with the consequences. So, the US can't give up on supporting Ukraine for all the strategic reasons it's supporting Ukraine. So if Ukraine does something a bit crazy, if it works, then they go, okay, you didn't ask us permission for that, but well done. That was pretty good. We approve of that. And if it doesn't work, then they go, behind the scenes, they go, you naughty, naughty boys and girls. But in public, they go, okay, we're going to help you deal with that anyway, because it's still within our strategic interests to do so. So that's an interesting view there from the Financial Times. Now, here we have H.R. McMaster, who was formerly working with the Trump administration. Listen to Republican H.R. McMaster straight up confirm the basis of the first Trump impeachment, that Trump stalled critical military aid for Ukraine to try and get election dirt on the Bidens. Now, we already know this. This is why the impeachment took place. It didn't work because obviously you needed the support from the Republicans, and they're never going to give that. I did a whole video on the javelins thing. I still get many people saying, yeah, but Trump gave javelins. No, he didn't. Congress gave javelins. McCain got javelins. Republican lawmakers got javelins to Ukraine. Trump didn't. He eventually signed off on it after trying to stall it to blackmail Zelensky into giving him stuff on Biden. He now claims that, hey, I gave javelins to Ukraine, but that wasn't his idea, and it wasn't really what he particularly wanted. He wanted leverage. And that's what he tried to get. And McMaster here is admitting this.
Because he, on the campaign trail, argues these counterfactuals that Putin was afraid of him, that Putin wouldn't have invaded Ukraine if he had been president.
Well, he has a point in a...
By the way, interestingly, in a book, so it was it John Bolton said that very clearly they weren't afraid of Trump. Trump claims that, but they weren't afraid of Trump. They were kind of laughing at Trump and getting what they needed out of him. That's what John Bolton claims. You've got the same from Kelly, and you got the same from all these people like Esper and others, who was the one before McMaster. Anyway, all of them pretty much agreeing that's not the case.
Well, he has a point in a couple of areas. In that first year of the Trump administration, I tell the story of how we imposed more sanctions on Russian entities in that 1 year than the previous 8 years of the Obama administration. And the really critical decision, though, Margaret, I think, was to provide the Ukrainians with defensive capabilities, especially in the form of Javelin missiles.
Right.
But in the area of inconsistency, I also tell the story about how that support was suspended, to get evidence of the Biden family's corrupt activities in Ukraine.
The grounds for impeachment, which
Right,
basically
absolutely.
you're saying were.
He said, right, absolutely. The grounds for impeachment, right, absolutely. So absolutely agreeing that there were the grounds there for impeachment of Trump.
For impeachment, which
Right,
basically
absolutely.
you're saying were.
Right,
We're justified.
Right, so there's an element in the story about how he can make really sound decisions and disrupt things that need to be disrupted in terms of foreign policy and national security, but oftentimes struggles to hang on to those decisions and see them through.
Because he on
So there you go. Now, Pekka Kaljaniemi here says, imagine being a US senator and falling for the most ridiculous Russian BS spread by no other than Kim.com. We talked about Kim.com. He's going to be extradited from New Zealand to America by the looks of it. This is Mike Lee. He was a senator from Utah, isn't he? Senator from Utah for the Republican Party, saying just spreading absolute outright Russian disinformation. Senator Mike Lee of Utah shared a theory from Kim.com last night that the CIA was funding pro-Ukraine online activist troll meme groups NAFO, known for their dog profile pics and memes, and that former Representative Adam Kinzinger was an organizer of the group. Kim.com just lost a 12-year battle over extradition to the US on charges related to his file-sharing website and is known for sharing conspiracy theories on X, like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and numerous pro-Russian opinions. And Mike Lee here is just an absolute dingbat, producing and spreading, not producing, but spreading Russian narratives and disinformation. This is it. When you've had people rightfully, like Representative Turner and others in Republicans in Congress, saying our party has been compromised by the Russians, and we have people standing up in Congress saying things that the Russians want us to say. This is the sort of stuff he's talking about. Yeah, it may not be in Congress, but you've got a senator spouting pro-Russian propaganda. That is, I think, dangerous, and that is something that should be concerning for US national security. Mike Lee is an absolute tool. There's no doubt about that. And finally, we have Anton Gerashchenko talking to this. Remember, I showed you that video that had been stripped of audio, so it was silent, and it had also been blurred, so you couldn't read anything on the paper. And it was Putin talking to Gerasimov. And this kind of shows that Gerasimov is still alive and kicking and doing proper Gerasimov stuff. A lot of people at the time said, in my thread, said, by the way, this could be precisely because the audio had been stripped out. You can't tell when this was, what they were talking about. This could have been anything, and actually could have been filmed a year ago. These are really old telephones. Now, interesting that that Gerashchenko says, interesting detail, there's hand sanitizer on Putin's desk during a meeting with Gerasimov. Putin is afraid of getting sick. It looks like Putin continues to stay in his bunker. It seems that close officials are still quarantined before meeting with Putin, and Putin with a hand sanitizer, and Putin in crowds in Baku and Chechnya. Are they the same person? We talked about this before, that not only can you make an argument, and there has been through Japanese AI, that the faces of these different Putins are different. One has a, 43% similarity with another and a 50% with that, but these other two have only an 18% similarity with each other. And I think there's been a voice analysis done as well. But also there's a behavioral difference. So you have a Putin that is afraid to meet anyone, sits at the other end, or be in close contact with other people, sits at the end of the table, was afraid during lockdown of people visiting him, so that they had to be sprayed before they went into Putin's accommodation or his palace. He was afraid of COVID, and yeah, he would sit far away from other people, doesn't really touch them and talk to them. And then you got a Putin that's going out hugging randos in Azerbaijan and Chechnya, and like kissing people on the cheek and stuff. You're like, these can't be the same people. Now, what's interesting is this is clearly the case that there is hand sanitizer on the table, and that's pretty normal. But you could also argue that that might be something that was closer to the end of COVID and might not be there now. So maybe this is evidence actually that it is indeed an older bit of footage that is from a couple of years ago, where Gerasimov was, alive and kicking and speaking as normally as he was then. Now, I don't know that he's all there, Gerasimov. So loads of conspiracy theories, and some of them I think are pretty well evidenced that actually, Gerasimov ain't all there. And this bit of footage doesn't tell us that him and Poots have been having close discussions about the war in Ukraine. This could well have been something to do with something else completely, and could have been from 2021. Whatever. Anyway, that's enough for me. Enough banging on. This has been a long one. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Toodle pips.